Hey, you guys, and welcome to the Fireside Chat podcast. I am one of your hosts, Danielle Johnston, and I am excited to be on here with you guys today. So, if you've never been to the Fireside Chat podcast, normally my husband Justin and I run this podcast, and we talk about things like what it's like to own your gym together, the world of cheerleading. And so we're excited to be on here with you. However, it is just me again today. So I want to thank those of you who are listening. And with that, let's get into it. Okay, guys, so today we are going to talk about the dynamics of working with your spouse and some of the challenges that you might encounter. So Justin and I have actually worked together pretty much the whole time we've known each other. In fact, we actually started dating because we met each other at work. That was 14 years ago, before we had a gym or anything like that. We worked together in the Air Force. I was in public affairs, he was in safety, and he worked right down the hall from me. So at the time, there was a really good structure of how everything worked. You know, he had his own boss, I had my own boss. We worked in separate offices, though we were in the same building and pretty much right down the hall from each other. We saw each other at work all the time, but it was a little bit easier because at the time, there was this structure that really didn't require him to be my boss or me to be his boss. And even in the few times that we worked together, there were some really good boundaries because we just happened to have kind of different roles within our jobs. So fast forward just a couple of years, and we had, gotten married. He had 3 kids. I had 1 child. Our blended family was living together. We had all these other things going on just as a family. And we decided to open a gym. And there was this, strange dynamic for a while because I was the only one who was full-time at the gym. And so Justin would take care of the kids at night and for the most part, feed them dinner and put them to bed. And I would get home really late at night from having been at the gym all day. And that created a really challenging experience for us because in all reality, he wanted to be self-employed also. Right? We had created this amazing thing together, but I was the only one that was getting to benefit from being employed at my own business. It created a lot of challenges for us, not only the fact that it can kind of become a lonely place, even with your spouse, but there was a little bit of, I don't know if I would say jealousy or maybe even resentment, but for sure, Justin was kind of living through me for those couple of years, right? I would be working really hard at the gym on, projects and trying to get our marketing in order and our website and all this stuff. And he would call me from work and he'd be like, so what are you doing? What's going on? And in a lot of ways, I can look back now and I can see that Justin was kind of living through me because I was living his dream of being able to be self-employed. But at the same time, we just couldn't figure out what was his role going to be in the gym. He didn't coach, he didn't have a background in cheerleading, but he was passionate about being an entrepreneur. So maybe you're in that stage of life right now where one of the 2 spouses is full-time at the gym and the other still has a full-time job. Maybe you both have full-time jobs, yet you work together at the gym. Or maybe you're where we are now, where Justin and I are both employed by the gym. No matter what the situation, you can for sure experience some challenges having worked with your spouse. So let's get into those. In this episode, I am going to talk to you about some of the challenges we have encountered over the years. And then in our next episode, part 2, I'm going to talk to you about some of the changes that we had to make both in our personal and career lives to make that work together. Because, if you think that being married sometimes can be hard and making decisions about your kids or your money or your house can be hard, gosh, throw a business on top of that and you are going to find some of the more challenging conversations that you've ever had in your life and probably in your marriage. Okay, so the first one of these that I have is that Justin and I operate kind of on different time schedules. And I don't just mean that I get up early and he stays up late. Like, I don't just mean that. And I don't even just mean that, when we were employed in two different places, but still working together at the gym, I don't even mean that like our schedules were dictated differently. It's literally what is your time of day that you find is like your zone of genius, right? For me, that is like pretty early in the morning. And I don't mean like 5 a.m., but I do mean shortly after I wake up. So within a couple hours of waking up. That's the time that my brain is really rolling. Like, it's the time that I am the most effective. I would say I could probably get, 60 to 75% of my work done in those first couple hours that I'm awake in the mornings. Whereas afternoon and evening, like, my brain just doesn't function that way. And that can be a challenge for us because Justin is definitely the more like traditional gym owner that I think we hear about sometimes, where they function really well in the evenings, and like he could stay up late working on projects or working on things, that have to do with the gym. He doesn't mind talking about business at night, and that is definitely a challenge for me. I would say from the time I go to coach to like the next morning, I am just not interested in talking about the business or troubleshooting things for the business or finances or anything like that. Like, my brain goes into coaching for those couple of hours, and then by the time I get home, I just don't want to talk about business. So that can be one of the bigger challenges when you're married and working with your spouse, is that maybe you operate on different schedules. Now, of course, you might literally operate on different schedules with different functions. So for example, maybe your spouse does still work during the day. And when you see each other, the only time that you can talk about the gym is nighttime. And maybe you're like me, where you really struggled to do that. So that can for sure be another challenge, and definitely something we experienced in those years that he was still employed by the Air Force. The second challenge that you're probably going to find is that balance between personal and professional relationships. So obviously, you probably have your roles within your home, right? So for me, I tend to be the one that is planning and organizing things and coordinating the kids and stuff like that. Kind of a traditional wife's role, I would say. Whereas at our gym, like, I just have so many irons in the fire that I have to have some of my staff do those things, right? Like, that's the element of delegation that, like, I just wish I could have in my personal life, but I can't have. And that's the element that I have in that professional life. And so a lot of times, Justin will ask me something. Let's say it's something at home, and it's something as simple as like, can you get this at the grocery store? I'm more likely to remember those things at work than I am at home, because a lot of times I have this whole separate challenge of like, my brain can only handle so much, and I can't really blur those personal and professional things. And so my brain really struggles with that, right? So if we're at work and we're at the gym and he asks me something about home, like, I have a really hard time switching over. That said, if you work with your spouse, you probably find that while certain things don't blend over, others sometimes do. So if you ever have kind of been frustrated or mad at your spouse, and then you have to go coach together, or you have to walk into a business meeting together, gosh, that is a challenge. And it is one that we can empathize with you on, because there have been so many times that, maybe we don't agree on something, or we both had a really hard morning, or the kids were a challenge. And now we have to go in and we have to kind of compartmentalize those things and not blur the personal and the professional, though we're often in those situations with the exact same person. And of course, you're going to feel the most comfortable, the most at ease with your spouse. And so that can create, a lot of additional conflict, and it can create a lot of challenging environments for those who are around you if you're blurring those personal and professional lines. The third one we run into is an over communication versus under communication. So I would definitely say I err on the side of under communication, like 99% of the time. I tend to kind of think other people can read my mind. I tend to not write things out very much for others. I just sort of tell them and expect them to remember. Though when the situation is reversed, I am just not very good with remembering, details about things. And so I find that we have this balance that we struggle with sometimes when it comes to over communication versus under communication. Am I over communicating in certain parts, which of course I do, and maybe your husband or spouse is like mine, where he has a word limit for the day. When I do get into those moments where I just want to talk something out, that can be really hard because sometimes Justin's like, okay, Danielle, I have a 75,000 word limit for the day and you have exceeded it. That can be really hard because maybe I want to talk about business, but it's on the professional end that I need to have that conversation, but yet on the personal end, I've kind of exceeded my word limit for the day. And if you guys think that's really insensitive, I'm literally doing this podcast, 12 minutes in now, and I'm totally by myself just talking to you. So if you think that that's maybe insensitive, it's probably pretty justified. You can also run into the situation where sometimes you're communicating and you are so organized within the gym that you kind of forget to have that same level of communication and organization in the personal life. And so for sure, I have experienced this too. I am on the go so much with the gym and I'm so organized and laying out these schedules for staff and laying out the parent information for competitions. And then we get into the personal end and I don't know what we're having for dinner. I don't know what groceries are in the house. I don't know when the lady is coming over to clean. I don't know when the dog's vet appointment is until 30 minutes before. No matter how organized you are, there is probably some area of life, be it your car, your desktop, your closet, your brain, something that you have this level of disorganization. And so for me, I see that while I have it with work, that I'm super organized and I'm a 2 to 3 tab max kind of person on my laptop, I do not always embody that in my personal life. And so my car can be a complete mess. My brain can be a complete mess. I am not always prepared, yet sometimes there is that level of expectation from your spouse because they've just seen how much you've prepared on the professional end. And I think sometimes that can be confusing. It can almost make it appear that you have prioritized one element of your life over the others. And maybe that's the case, but in other senses, a lot of times it's just because that's what I've spent the day doing. And for a lot of us, work can get the best hours of your day. And I do think that your family sometimes gets the leftovers, right? Your leftover emotions that you have left at the end of the night, your leftover time. And so for my family, and we'll get in the next episode on what are the corrections and the things that we've done to combat this. But I think for my family, I've had to set aside those vacation times. We go on multiple vacations a year. On the nights that I don't work, I don't go into the gym. And I've had to set those boundaries for that reason. But more on that part in the next episode. Okay, so number 4 here would be the misalignment of things. And I think that can become one of the challenges when we under communicate. But number 2, you have to set your goals as a business and as owners. And we have experienced times within our gym that Justin and I do not perhaps have the same goals. And I think that can be a challenge for us because while our end goal for our lives as, a family are kind of set, we both maybe have different strategies career-wise on how we intend to get there. And so where I think sometimes your spouse is very trustworthy saying, okay, you're going to get this promotion at work, or you're a teacher and you have 7 more years of teaching before you can retire. I think that sometimes when you are self-employed, you have so much more freedom and so much more liberty that you don't always come to those conclusions together, or you come to them and maybe they change for you over time. I've owned my gym for 13 years now, and my youngest is a freshman in high school, and you kind of start looking forward to the future. You're like, okay, in 3 or 4 years, do I want to still live in Missouri? Do I still want to have a job that I cannot work remotely? Do I still want to have this level of responsibility? And if I do, how much longer do I foresee myself having that? And I think that's where it can become a challenge, because as you work together, your personal goals and your professional goals often weave together so closely that it can be very challenging when one of you says, okay, pause, I might want to change the way I'm doing this. And so whether it's the end goal itself or the path by which you are going to get to that goal, I definitely think that that can be something that a husband and wife or spouses can find as a misaligning path when you're looking for, like, where do we go from here? And what are, certainly can become one of the biggest challenges when you work with your spouse. Okay, and lastly, the various roles that you may hold, whether they are in the house or professionally, and sometimes those roles do not fully align with one another. So here in our house, when it comes to our kids, Justin tends to kind of be the typical father figure. He is sometimes the bad guy, sometimes the good guy, but usually he's just like the fun dad. But a lot of times, he is kind of the final figure on things. For example, when we went to build our house, I was pretty good with the flow. And those of you who know me may be super surprised by that. But I was like, I want to design the kitchen and I don't really care. You can do the rest. Of course, then I, picked garage doors and got us way out of budget and like all of these things. But I was pretty go with the flow with things. And he was definitely like the CEO of building our house, right? So if you compare that to then working in the gym, Justin is I don't know the best way to say it. He's an owner, but he's definitely like support personnel. Like, he isn't actively coaching the teams. He goes to competitions, but more so to watch our daughter. He doesn't necessarily go to competitions to coach teams. He will surely support all of the athletes and the coaches. He'll go to our staff parties, of course. He pops in the gym almost probably more on a daily basis than I do. But when it comes to kind of making the final decisions, whether that be finance or staffing or, the systems and processes at the gym, that really does fall back to me. And so it's definitely kind of a role reversal when it comes to the final decision in certain things. In our personal lives, I have really given that over to him to make the final decision if we can't decide on something. Whereas in the gym, I'm kind of the person who's making the final decision on a lot of the things that move us forward and drive us forward. Then there is this extra layer of challenge if you tend to own, a couple of businesses, which I know a lot of our listeners do. Maybe you own a choreography company or skills company or something totally different, like we have rentals and even Next Gen for that matter, where we definitely both hold very different roles. Whereas in the gym, I would kind of make the final decision on a lot of things, and he's, super supportive of that. In our rentals, like, that is not my decision to make. I don't want that decision. It is beyond my skill level. And so there are times that I get so comfortable being the final authority and the final decision within our gym because that's the role that we've both put me in. Sometimes my opinion is just a little bit too strong when it comes to the rentals, and he has to kind of remind me, like, okay, Danielle, but I am the CEO when it comes to that. And so I'm going to make my decision. And he's right. So I think that can definitely be like a different challenge too for those who own multiple businesses, or maybe you hold various roles within, a nonprofit, or you volunteer together, or whatever that may be. I think that can add a whole extra layer of challenge when it comes to the different roles that you play with your spouse. So guys, a couple of the quick things that I really didn't get into here, things that can challenge this dynamic even more. If you have children who work in your business, 3 of our 4 have actually worked at the gym before. 2 have graduated and since moved on. 1 does still work at the gym. And then 1 just really wasn't into cheerleading and tumbling. And so that was not his thing. But if you have children of your own who work in the gym, gosh, that can become a whole added layer of challenge on top of all this. Okay, what about if you have family who works in the gym? This can definitely be an additional challenge. And I don't mean your kids, because we just talked about that. But what about like someone's sister or someone's cousin? Justin's mom has actually worked in our gym before. His sister has worked in our gym. And so I think if you don't have really clear boundaries, again, we'll talk about the solutions on the next episode, that can be a whole added layer of challenge as well. I do know a whole bunch of gym owners who, like, maybe they own it with their sister and her husband or something like that. Or maybe you and your spouse own the gym together and your sister works in the gym or coaches in the gym. And as we know, brothers and sisters do not always have the best boundaries with each other, nor do parents and children. And so that can definitely add a whole separate layer of challenge onto this, because now you're having to add in that extra dynamic of this other person that you are fiercely loyal to. And what does that look like when you have to start making decisions? Someone inevitably might be really unhappy with you. And so who is unhappy with you? And do you have to go home with that decision at the end of the night? Okay, and then the last one that I want to just briefly touch on today, because we have been there. It's been a lot of years since we've experienced this. However, what about money? It can become one of your biggest challenges at the gym, regardless of if you work with your spouse or not. But now add in this extra layer of both of your incomes are coming from the gym. Or maybe you get paid differently. Maybe one of you still has a part-time job or still has a job of some kind. And now you are having to look at what is the worth of each of you, right? And this is a really touchy, sensitive subject. It is a huge challenge to have those discussions. And I will very admittedly tell you, I so badly wanted to be full-time in my gym when I first started that I took a little bit of a pay cut. I did not fully transparently tell Justin about that in the beginning. I was willing to pay myself late. I was willing to pay myself when I could afford to pay myself. I was willing to pay myself what I could afford to pay myself. And it was not as much as my previous job had been, which was sort of not part of the deal when he and I agreed that I would go full-time at the gym. Boy, was that a challenge, you guys. And I look back and think, what a mistake I made by not having that level of transparency. Not only does it just kind of feel awful, and I'm like admitting to the world now that I didn't have that level of transparency, but my passion was greater than my conscience in the moment, right? I know that any other employer would pay me on time, would pay me what I'm worth, or at minimum pay me what they agreed to pay me. And yet I wasn't doing that for myself. And so without going too far on a tangent here or down a rabbit trail, just know that that can create a serious amount of animosity between spouses when you are looking at what each of you is getting paid. Are you getting paid on time? Are you getting paid appropriately? Are you getting paid what you're worth? And I think that that can really create problems, right? You should be getting paid what you're worth on time every time, just like you would if you were to work for someone else. And if you're not, I can understand why your spouse might be feeling frustrated. So as much as the finances can be a challenge at home, they can certainly be the challenge in the gym. Add to that if you're not both on the same page when it comes to the strategy of how to make that money and how to bring that revenue in the door, my gosh, what a challenge that is. Because perhaps one of you is just trying to say, okay, I want to invest into the marketing. I want to invest into the staff and training my staff. And the other is saying, you have to cut expenses. You don't have the money to market. You don't have the money to invest in staff. That is going to put you guys in one really big dilemma because you're essentially going two different directions trying to have the same outcome. Something that helped us tremendously when that was the case for us, because we have experienced that as well, is Justin and I kind of had to get on the same page when it came, again, this is coming in the next episode, but I'm going to give you some of it right now because I feel like I'm just giving you all the bad parts of working with your spouse when really it is a pretty wonderful thing also. However, I want to leave you with this. You know, when we were finding those challenges that we were on two completely different pages, it really helped us to have a business coach that could align our goals. The coach sometimes said I was right, sometimes said Justin was right, but it wasn't really about who was right. It was about finding that education and helping us both to understand it in such a way that we say, okay, this is what is going to help us get to our goal, and we can be on the same page. I would say in many ways, having that person and being able to experience that together, that business coaching and that education together, was what made this the most smooth process for us. So I will certainly go more into that next week when I talk about, the things that we have done over the years to really try and help align us and take out some of the turmoil of those experiences working with your spouse. In the meantime, you guys, we are super excited to be bringing you 2 amazing conferences this summer. We will be in Orlando, April 14th, and then at the end of June, we will be in Dallas. Both of those release in February. You can get all of the information at ngconferences.com. So please head over to our website. Make sure that you are checking in February. Make sure you're on our email list. And then also make sure that you head over, if you are a gym owner, and join the Gym Owners group for All-Star Gym Owners and the All-Star Coaches group on Facebook if you are a coach. All right, you guys, with that, I will see you guys on the next episode of Fireside Chat.